She laughed softly, her eyes never leaving mine. You're bold for a boy. I like that. I didn't know it then, but that single moment would change everything. It started like any other casual afternoon, a visit to my friend's house, nothing more than a quick stop to catch up before we headed out. The late afternoon light slanted across the living room, turning everything a warm, soft gold. There she was, his mother, sitting by the window with a book in her lap. I had seen her plenty of times before, exchanged polite greetings, but something about that moment made me pause. Maybe it was the way the light fell on her face, softening the fine lines around her eyes, or the quiet ease in her posture. She wasn't trying to be noticed, yet she carried herself like someone entirely at peace with who she was. She looked up as I entered, her lips curving into a smile that felt warm and unhurried. "You're early," she said, closing the book with a faint thud. "Yeah, figured I'd beat the traffic," I replied casually, tossing my keys on the table. My friend was still upstairs, getting ready. It left the two of us in that wide, sunlit room, the air carrying the faint smell of fresh coffee. I wasn't sure if it was the silence or the way she filled it so effortlessly, but I found myself standing there, suddenly aware of her presence in a way I hadn't before. I made a remark, something half joking, half honest, about how her son always made me wait. It was the kind of teasing banter I'd normally toss around without much thought. But she laughed, really laughed, tilting her head slightly as her eyes held mine. "You're bold for a boy," she said, her voice low and amused, a trace of challenge hidden beneath the warmth. "I like that." There was nothing scandalous in her tone, nothing inappropriate, just a flicker of acknowledgement, a brief, electric moment that hung between us. Still, I felt the words land somewhere deeper than they should have. I chuckled it off, shrugging like it was nothing, but the sound of her laugh lingered. It wasn't the kind of laugh that filled a room. It was subtler, richer, like she'd seen enough of the world to choose her moments carefully. As my friend finally came down the stairs, all easy grin and car keys in hand, the moment passed like it had never happened. We made our plans, talked over each other, joked as always. But in the back of my mind, I kept hearing it, that single line, the way her eyes had held mine when she said it. It shouldn't have mattered. She was just my friend's mom, confident, composed, a little out of my league in every possible way. And yet that one sentence, it had cracked open a door I didn't know existed. I didn't know it then, but that afternoon, the coffee, the sunlight, the sound of her laugh, was the start of something I wouldn't be able to shake so easily. It had been a few days since that brief exchange, but her words still echoed in the back of my mind. "You're bold for a boy." I like that. I tried not to read too much into it. It was just a line, a playful remark at best. Still, it lingered, replaying at odd times, while brushing my teeth, waiting at a red light, lying in bed before sleep. This afternoon, I found myself at their house again, this time just dropping something off for my friend. He wasn't home, but his mother was. I almost considered leaving the package with a neighbor to avoid the strange flutter in my chest, but before I could even decide, the front door opened. She stood there in a light blouse with the sleeves loosely rolled up, the kind of effortless look that somehow made her presence fill the doorway. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands catching the soft breeze. "Oh, it's you," she said, smiling as her eyes flicked down to the package in my hands. "He's out running errands. Do you want to leave that here?" I stepped inside, the familiar scent of their home wrapping around me, a blend of brewed tea and something faintly floral. She led me toward the kitchen, the afternoon sun streaming through the window and catching the fine dust in the air. "Tea?" she offered, already reaching for a second cup without waiting for my answer. I sat on the edge of the counter stool, watching her move, not in any deliberate way, just the natural rhythm of someone at ease in their own space. There was something calming about it, and before I knew it, we were talking, about the weather first, then about her garden, and somehow, it slipped into stories from her own youth. She spoke about how she used to travel when she was younger, little adventures across cities, places she'd worked, the people she'd met. I found myself listening more intently than I expected, my fingers tracing the rim of the mug she'd placed in front of me. At one point, as she passed me a plate of biscuits, her fingers brushed against mine, just barely, a fleeting touch, and for a reason I couldn't explain, it felt like something. Warm, brief, but enough to stir that same quiet awareness I'd felt the other day. She noticed me looking at her, maybe longer than I should have, because a faint smile curved her lips. "You're quieter than usual," she said softly. I cleared my throat, shaking my head. "Just listening." Her gaze lingered for a moment before she turned back to the counter, but that small, knowing sound carried more than casualness. By the time I left, the sun had dipped lower, painting the street in a warm, mellow glow. I told myself it was nothing, just respect for someone who had stories worth hearing. But as I walked away, the faint trace of her perfume still clung to my sleeve, and I wondered why I noticed things like that now. The rain had come suddenly that evening, heavy, steady, the kind that turned the world outside into a soft blur of silver streaks and wet asphalt. I hadn't planned to stay this long. My friend was upstairs, still lost in whatever was keeping him occupied, and I sat in the living room nursing a cup of tea his mother had offered me. The house felt quieter than usual, almost cocooned by the sound of the rain against the windows. The smell of brewed tea mingled with something faintly citrus, maybe the candle flickering on the coffee table, its flame bending each time a draft slipped through. She walked in with a folded blanket in her arms, her hair slightly damp from stepping outside moments earlier. "Storm's heavier than I thought," she said, draping the blanket over the couch arm. "You might want to wait it out for a bit." I nodded, taking a sip. "Not in a rush anyway." She sat across from me, a soft rustle as her clothes settled. For a few moments neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet, like the rain had drawn a line between the outside world and this still, warm moment. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. "You're always so thoughtful," she said, almost as if thinking aloud. I gave a small laugh. "Is that a good thing?" She smiled faintly, her fingers curling around her own cup. "It is. People your age don't often stop to think before speaking. It's refreshing." There was something about the way she said it, not patronizing, not distant, just honest. I felt that same small stir I'd been trying to ignore for days now, that quiet pull toward her presence. She leaned forward a little, elbows resting lightly on her knees. "You're quiet tonight. What's on your mind?" The question caught me off guard. I glanced down at the tea, watching the faint steam curl upward. "Just a lot lately. Future plans. Where I'm headed. That's a good thing to think about," she said softly. Her gaze was steady, not probing, just present. It's rare to see someone your age already paying attention to the bigger picture. I hesitated, the words nearly spilling out. How I found her presence grounding, how these small conversations somehow felt like more than they should. But I held them back, unsure what was appropriate, unsure where the line really was. A soft laugh escaped her, barely above the sound of the rain. "You've got that look," she murmured. "What look?" "Like you want to say something but you're afraid it'll change everything." I managed a smile. "Maybe I am." Her eyes lingered on mine a moment longer before she leaned back, the moment dissolving into a comfortable silence again. The rain kept falling, and somewhere upstairs, my friend called down that he'd be ready soon. But in that quiet space between her words and mine, something had shifted, not enough to name, but enough to notice. It was supposed to be a quick errand, dropping off some groceries for my friend's family. He wasn't home yet again. But she was. She greeted me with that same calm, composed smile, her hair tied back, a loose cardigan draped over her shoulders. "You really are becoming our unofficial delivery guy," she teased lightly as she held the door open. I chuckled, stepping inside with the bags. "Someone has to keep you two from starving." The house smelled faintly of baked bread and something herbal simmering on the stove. She led me into the kitchen, and as I set the bags down, she reached for one at the same time. Our hands brushed, just a small, unplanned touch, but I felt it, warm against my skin. "Careful," she said with a soft laugh. "You'll bruise the apples." I laughed quietly too, though my pulse had quickened for no good reason. She began unpacking, sleeves slipping a little as she stretched to place something on the higher shelf. Would you mind helping me with the top cupboard? My arm isn't as long as I'd like to pretend. I moved closer, reaching past her to take the box from her hands. For a brief moment, we were standing so near that I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something subtle, floral, with a touch of spice. Her shoulder brushed my arm as she stepped aside, murmuring a thanks, her voice quieter now. The moment passed quickly, just two people organizing groceries, but the air had shifted, not heavy, just aware. She handed me another item, this time her fingers lingering slightly longer as they released it. You're handy to have around, she said, her tone easy but her eyes flicking up to meet mine for a second longer than casual. I placed the last item on the shelf, stepping back. Guess that makes me useful, huh? She smiled, that soft, knowing smile she had, and shook her head. Not just useful. Reliable. There's a difference. There was a pause after that, the kind that didn't demand to be filled, yet I felt the weight of it anyway. My heart beat a little faster, though I couldn't explain why. Then, almost as quickly as it had formed, the moment dissolved again into the ordinary. She thanked me for the help, offered me tea I declined this time, and the conversation drifted to simple, harmless things: the weather, my plans for the weekend, her errands for the day. But as I left the kitchen, I was acutely aware of the faint warmth where her shoulder had brushed mine, the whisper of her perfume still lingering in the air behind me. It wasn't anything either of us had planned, but something in that quiet, accidental closeness had stayed with me. The evening air was cooler than I expected, the kind that carried a hint of rain but didn't quite commit. A few of us had gathered earlier, nothing formal, just neighbors and old friends sharing a meal, and as it all wound down, she offered to walk me to the corner. It wasn't far, just a quiet stretch of street lit by warm, aging lamps. The sound of our footsteps filled the pauses between our words. She had a light shawl draped over her shoulders, her hair loose now, catching bits of the evening breeze. For a while, we talked about safe things, the food, the evening, the familiar rhythm of the neighborhood. But there was something different in her tone tonight. She wasn't rushing the conversation. She was pacing it, almost as if she was waiting for something to surface. Do you ever feel, she began, her voice soft, that people see you, but not really see you? I glanced at her, surprised by the sudden shift. All the time, I admitted. Especially lately. Feels like everyone has their version of me, and I'm just trying to keep up with it. She smiled faintly at that, her eyes lowering to the pavement. It's rare to hear someone your age say that. Most people don't even notice the difference until much later. We slowed near a bend in the road, the breeze catching her shawl just enough to brush against my hand. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. I suppose I've learned to be careful with how much of myself I share, she said quietly. Life teaches you that, what to say, what to hide, how to fit into the roles people expect of you. There was a pause there, not awkward, just open. I found myself saying, I think that's what I admire about you. You don't pretend. Not really. You carry yourself like you've made peace with who you are, even if people don't always get it. She stopped walking for a moment, turning toward me. The street lamp above us cast a soft light across her face, catching the edges of her eyes. There was something unreadable in her expression, not surprise, not disapproval, just stillness. You're bold for a boy. She murmured, the same words she'd said once before, but softer this time, almost thoughtful. But I like that. My chest tightened, not in the way of fear, but in the way a door feels when it finally creaks open. I didn't reach for her. I didn't say anything reckless. But something in the way we looked at each other in that moment made the world a little quieter. As we reached the corner, she smiled again, that gentle, composed smile, and said, Thank you for walking with me. It's been a while since a conversation felt honest. And just like that, the night went back to being a night. But the way her words settled in my chest didn't leave with me. The night was unusually still. The rain from the past few days had finally cleared, leaving the sky washed and clean, stars scattered like fine dust across the deep blue canvas. I hadn't meant to linger this late, but conversations have a way of bending time, especially in that house. I stepped outside to call a ride, only to find her on the porch, wrapped in a light shawl, a mug between her hands. The porch light glowed soft and amber, just enough to catch the silver in her hair and the quiet curve of her profile as she looked toward the night sky. "You're still here," she said without turning, her voice calm, almost relieved. "Yeah," I replied, leaning against the railing. "Didn't want to head out just yet." The boards beneath us creaked gently as I shifted closer. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and the jasmine that climbed along the fence. For a moment we didn't speak, just stood there, listening to the crickets and the soft hum of the neighborhood settling into night. She sipped her drink slowly before asking, "Do you ever find nights like these make you think too much?" I let out a breath of a laugh. "All the time. Seems like that's when everything you've been avoiding decides to show up." Her lips curved into a quiet smile. "Exactly." She moved slightly, the fabric of her shawl brushing my arm as she leaned against the same railing. The touch was nothing more than an inch of warmth, but I felt it in a way I couldn't ignore. "I wasn't sure what to make of you at first," she said after a pause. "You remind me of a version of myself that used to believe in little moments. You still notice them?" I turned toward her, our shoulders now almost touching. "Maybe because the little moments are the only ones that feel real." She looked at me then, really looked. The kind of look that stays steady, doesn't flinch, doesn't search for the next thing to say. Her fingers shifted slightly on her mug before she set it down on the railing. "Can I be honest?" she asked softly. I nodded. "It's been a long time since someone's presence felt this easy." Her hand found mine then, not in a dramatic gesture, just a quiet placement, her fingers resting lightly over my knuckles. Warm, steady. A small bridge across a very careful distance. I didn't grip her hand. I didn't pull away. I just let it be, feeling the weight of the night wrap around us, stars overhead, the faint coolness of the air, her thumb tracing a small, almost absent-minded arc against my skin. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. There was no need. The moment wasn't asking for words, just a kind of mutual stillness, a silent agreement that this was real, even if fragile. Somewhere behind us, a light flicked off, breaking the spell just enough for her to withdraw her hand. "You should go before it gets too late," she whispered. And though I left the porch a few minutes later, that warmth lingered like the scent of jasmine in the night. The morning felt softer than most, the kind where the light doesn't rush in but slowly drapes itself across the kitchen tiles. I hadn't planned on being there so early, but a quick errand for my friend had turned into an unexpected cup of coffee, and somehow, she and I ended up sharing the same quiet space again. The kettle hummed gently on the stove. She moved with her usual calm, her hair still slightly damp from a shower, sleeves pushed up just enough to show the faint line where her watch had been. There was no pretense in her movements, just a kind of unspoken ease. "Coffee?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Sure," I said, settling at the small table by the window. The morning air slipped in through the barely opened pane, carrying the distant scent of rain-wet earth. When she set the cup in front of me, her fingers brushed my shoulder, light, unintentional maybe, but warm all the same. It wasn't the touch that lingered as much as the way her hand stayed there for a heartbeat longer than necessary, the faint squeeze before she let go. "You've been good company," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the coffee she poured for herself. "Not just this week, I mean in general. It's been grounding." I smiled faintly. "I could say the same." She sat opposite me, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. For a moment, neither of us tried to fill the air. The world outside was just beginning to stir, the sound of a neighbor's car starting, a bird somewhere on the fence, the faint clatter of cups from upstairs. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but softer than usual, "about how life rarely gives us clear lines. We think there are rules, how we should act, what we should feel, what's too much, what's allowed. And then something or someone comes along and redraws it all. I nodded slowly. And we pretend it's simple, even when it isn't. Her eyes met mine, not searching for reassurance, not asking for anything, just meeting me there. You've reminded me of a part of myself I'd set aside. And that matters. I didn't reach across the table. I didn't say anything bold this time. Instead, I let the quiet stretch, let the warmth between us be what it was, real, gentle, unforced. Whatever this is, she said finally, a small smile tugging at her lips. I hope you don't lose that part of you. The one that notices. I exhaled through a laugh, a low one. And I hope you don't stop being the reason I did. Her smile deepened, not wide, not obvious, but enough to feel like a promise in its own way. By the time I left, the morning had fully broken, sunlight spilling across the pavement, the world already moving on. But as I stepped outside, I felt lighter, as though something had quietly settled between us. Not a declaration. Not a promise. Just an understanding, warm, unspoken, and real.